Hi everyone, I'm Shelly from There's No Place Like Home at redheadmom8.wordpress.com. Over the past couple of weeks, I've just been sharing some tips on how to homeschool. 2 weeks ago, I shared some tips on homeschooling kindergarten to 3rd grade. A few days ago, I shared some tips on how to homeschool 4th to 8th. And now today, I'm going to tackle 9th to 12th. All right, so I'm actually recording this in the middle of a pretty severe thunderstorm, so I'm hoping that it doesn't get too loud and too distracting while all of this is going on. Because today I really wanted to help you to homeschool high school. Because if there were ever a time that a lot of people decide that maybe they should be sending their kids to public school, it's high school. Because the thought of preparing your teenager for college or whatever career or job options they have in mind can be a little bit intimidating. But you know what? I'm going to tell you today that if there were ever a time to homeschool, it is high school. And this is coming from someone that I think it's crucial to homeschool from the very beginning. I really, really do. But I think it is a huge mistake to send your child to public school because you just don't think that you have what it takes to homeschool high school. And I'm going to just hopefully share some ideas with you so that you realize that it is not as awful or as difficult as you think it is. So first of all, one thing that I want to point out is that if you saw my other 2 videos about how to homeschool, you will know that I am a relaxed homeschooler, and I truly believe that it is so important that you will embrace your child's own style of learning and you would be able to work the real world into your child's homeschool routine. So, I think that a lot of people think that by default you automatically have to do lots of textbooks for high school, because even though you might be able to get away with it in the early years or in the middle years, when it comes to high school, a lot of parents envision just their child just sitting and doing textbook after textbook and taking exams and writing term papers, and I think that's where a lot of that intimidation sets in. But what I'm going to tell you today is that your high schooler does not have to homeschool like a traditional school does their school. It doesn't have to happen that way. And so now some of the things that I talked about in some of my other videos will actually carry over to high school. So I'm going to go over just a few things that you could do with your high school quickly, and then I'll get into a few other things a little bit more in detail that I didn't talk about for the younger kids. So now some of the things that I mentioned in my other videos that will carry over through the high school years are unit studies. If you don't know what a unit study is, it's a cross-curricular lesson plan for a specific topic or possibly a book that will cover all of the subject areas by working different sorts of activities that have to do with that one subject area rather than using a textbook for each and every subject. It is a more holistic way to learn because they are just bringing in all sorts of information about one topic, but they're covering all of the required subject areas. I do have some videos on unit studies, and I will link 1 or 2 of them in the description box below if you are interested in learning more about them, and you can check that out after this is done. Another thing that you want to do with your high schooler that you may have been doing already with your younger kids is to maintain a learning-rich environment. And yeah, the things that you keep around your house, they're going to evolve. They're going to get a little bit more intricate, a little bit more mature for those older kids. But yeah, you still want to make sure that you have lots of stuff in your home that your teenagers want to do. Things that are going to keep them interested in learning and possibly interested in the things that they want to know more about. And make sure that you keep lots of things to help them do experiments. Experimenting and hands-on activities are still important at this age because they are still making sense of the world, even in a more I keep saying mature, but a more mature way. That's what it is. It's not just the basic things that they're learning about anymore. Very often they are branching off into their own experiments at this stage. So yeah, still keep that kitchen stocked with all kinds of materials for your kids to experiment with. And just keep all sorts of other materials in your cabinet, maybe not in your kitchen cabinet, possibly in your art cabinet or in a project cabinet that you have, but so that they might want to turn on YouTube. And there are tons of experiments for YouTube, and not just for little kids. There are high school age experiments on YouTube. Pinterest is another great place for your teenager to do hands-on experiments. So just, keep the stuff around the house, because if you don't have the stuff, what's going to happen is if they come across the experiment and they're going to see that they don't have anything that they need, and they're going to lose interest. So just try to keep as much basic as many basic tools on hand, so that if your kids do decide that they want to try something, at least if you have most of what they need and they just tell you, hey mom, can you get this? It'll be much easier, and you have a much bigger chance of them actually following through and doing that experiment. Now, of course, something else that is following through is just really to make sure that you have that daily reading time in for your high schoolers. Some high schoolers might do this naturally, because a lot of high schoolers love to read. But on the other hand, a lot of high schoolers do not love to read. And so this is why it's important to make sure, if you have one of those kids who really wouldn't read on their own, just have a specific, either a specific time period that you want them to read every day, or they have to read for a certain amount of time, or maybe they have to read a certain number of pages or a certain number of chapters. That is really up to you to decide. But I would really make sure that you do keep that in a structured setting for your high schoolers. And just remember that you don't have to be picking out books for your high schoolers either. You can. Absolutely. There are tons of books that I do want my teenagers to read, but you also want to give them the opportunity to pick out things that they would want to read, especially if they are those kids who don't really want to pick up a book. So if they pick up a comic book, that's fine. If they pick up a manga, that's fine. If they pick up, a trade book or a how-to book, that is fine. They are reading. So just keep that in mind. You don't want to just fill up their entire book list with things of your choice. Let them have a say too. Chores, that's another thing. A lot of times we don't think of chores as being education, but chores are life learning. They're things that your teenager is going to need to know how to do in the real world. And I think that a lot of kids who go to traditional school, they don't get experience in the things that they're going to need to know when they become adults. So this is the perfect time for you to help your teenager to learn those skills that they're going to need when they're older. Car repair, home repair, banking. All of those things are included with chores, and yes, they are education and they do count. Another thing that I talked about with younger kids was visual media. Of course, teenagers also like to watch documentaries, or sometimes they might be able to find a movie that goes with a book that they're reading or with a topic that they're learning about. And so, yeah, visual media in moderation. I'm guessing that you don't want your kids to be watching something every single day for school, but there are so many great things out there that will help them to supplement their learning and to keep things interesting for them. So don't rule out visual media. Another thing at this age that I talked about in my other videos is just taking full advantage of the library. Remember that, the library isn't just books. It is also, very often, there's all kinds of free classes. There are activities that they do, even sometimes for older kids. I know they have book clubs for teenagers. They have manga clubs at my library. They have anime clubs. There are DVDs there. Sometimes some libraries have musical instruments that they can use while they're there. Just see what your library has to offer. But yeah, you really want to make sure, especially when your kids are older, and they probably can get to the library by themselves every once in a while, you want to know exactly what it is that your library has to offer. Take advantage of it. A lot of them even offer free online foreign language classes as well. And field trips. Field trips are another thing that I didn't talk too much about in my video for the littles, but I did talk about it for the middle grade kids, 4th through 8th grade. And yes, it carries through into high. So when your kids are in the high school years, they are more mature and they are better able, they know how to behave on field trips, and they are better able to grasp a lot of the topics that are being discussed on field trips. And it really does help them to make connections in their learning if they are actually visiting a place that has something to do with something that they have been studying for a while. And the last thing that I'm just going to bring up that I did talk about for the younger kids is notebooking. If you don't know what notebooking is, I will leave some links in the description box for that as well. In short, what notebooking is having your child write about things, topics that they are learning about, instead of doing worksheets, instead of doing chapter review questions in a textbook. What notebooking is about is having your child write about the things that they know, the things that they have learned in a specific topic, and they can write about it in any way that they want. They can write about it in an oral a written narration form. They can write lists. They can write comic strips that incorporate things that they have learned in their topic and are relevant in the comic strip. They can even write fictional stories that, again, will incorporate some of the things that they have learned in a topic to show that they have a grasp of what they're learning about. But the nice thing about notebooking is that it really helps your kids to put a piece of themselves into what they've been learning. And rather than, those chapter review questions and the quizzes that they give with textbooks, that's very often, trying to see what your kids what they didn't learn, what they don't know. And the nice thing about notebooking is that it shows what your kids do know, and it is a much more positive way to approach learning. So now I'm going to move on to some things that are more useful for kids who are in the high school years. Things that are a little bit more advanced, and things that might not be good, for you to do with a kindergartner. Although some of these ideas you really could use for younger kids. But I think with younger kids, it is so important that you give them that time to just learn through play, because younger children learn through play. And it is when your kids are reaching these teenage years, these high school years, especially if they are planning on going to college, you do want to have a bit more structured learning than they have in the younger years. And I'm going to show you some things that you can do that will give you the structured learning that you may desire in your older kids, but without turning to the boredom of just doing textbook after textbook and worksheet after worksheet. So hopefully this will give you some ideas. So the first thing that you can do is to use a textbook table of contents as your guide. Now, I have been saying over and over again about, not doing textbooks all the time, because you know what? It is very shallow. Even though they're thick, they cover such a huge variety of topics that your kids aren't going to learn really deeply about any one topic if they're learning it through a textbook, because it's just little snippets of each subtopic in those books. The nice thing about textbooks, though, is that table of contents, because if you take a look at it, it will give you a synopsis of what the kids will be learning throughout that entire book. So instead of actually using that book to learn those things, you could take some ideas from the table of contents and maybe just supplement things from the library. Don't use the textbook at all. Go to the library and get some books out on the things that are listed in the table of contents, and I would probably do them in order, unless it doesn't really seem to be something that it matters if it's in chronological order. But just go down the list, and as your child or as your teenager is moving along, get some books from the library, because library books are so much more interesting than textbooks. And yes, they are going to get that deep learning from library books that they're not going to get from textbooks, because instead of just getting snippets, they are going to get full books on certain topics. And especially if your teenager has an area that they're really, really interested in, they don't want to just cover something that is their favorite thing to learn about in a 2-day span. They might want to spend, a month on it. And you know what? Let them. And the library is a great way to do that. And also, this is a good time for you to supplement with that visual media and with the hands-on experiments that I talked about earlier and field trips. And I do have a video on how to use a textbook table of contents as your guide. I will also leave that in the description box, the link to that. Another thing that you can use with your high schooler, again, instead of textbooks, are living books. And I was talking about going to the library for books, and the books that you find at the library, those are living books. Living books are written by people who have an intense interest in a subject area, and they're not textbook authors who are specifically writing something for a school system. The authors who write books for the libraries, they have a true interest in whatever subject area that they're writing about, and it shows through in the way they write. Now, this can come through in nonfiction books, the books that you find in the nonfiction section, biographies, autobiographies, and yes, even fiction books are considered living books, and your kids can learn from them. Your teenagers can learn from them. There are so many fantastic historical fiction novels that my teenagers learned more from than they ever would have from a textbook. For example, Johnny Tremaine is a fantastic example of a great living book that your teenager can learn about American history from in a way that it is not boring. If you have never read Johnny Tremaine, I highly suggest that you do, or have your teenager read it, because even for me, I hated history in high school. I love history now just because we have the advantage of being able to use these living books and not textbooks that are, I'm sorry, they're just dry. And it seems to me, even my oldest daughter, who preferred to use textbooks, she admitted to me that the only reason that she liked using them was because she was used to using them from when she was in school, but she said that nothing really stuck with her. Another idea that you can use at this age that you don't see a lot of people doing anymore is mentorships or job shadowing. Now, if you have a trusted adult who works in a field that your teenager has an interest in, see if they would let your teenager help out, learn the tricks of the trade. And you know what? You don't see many people doing this every now and then. But if you know someone who owns a small business, if you know someone who was a tradesman, very often they would love to have somebody who has a passion for that area to show them what they're doing. And if those tradesmen or those small business owners, if they love what they're doing, that's going to show, it's going to shine through onto your children. And it's going to be such a great lesson for them to learn, just that in itself. So think about that, mentorships and job shadowing. And other than that, they could even just seek out employment opportunities. And again, employment opportunities are learning. And I think that so many times that's discounted when it comes to homeschooling. They kind of seem to separate learning and work. And a lot of times you'll hear parents saying that they don't want their teenager to be working during their high school years because they have to focus on school. But the thing is that your teenager is missing out on so much if they are not being given the opportunity to get those jobs, to get those life skills, to just know how to interact with people, to know how to interact with people who are above you, to interact with superiors, to just learn how to do those hands-on things that actually matter in the world. And there's such a huge difference between them doing things just on paper at home, but then being out there and not only getting paid for it, but for them to do things in a way that they see actually has an effect on other people. And that is what kids who are in high school need to be learning, are those adulting skills. We always see that hashtag adulting everywhere. This is the perfect way for them to learn how to do that. And the last thing that I'm going to just suggest that you do with your high schoolers is just to let them explore. Very, very often when we think of what our kids are going to grow up to learn how to do, we tend to think that it's going to be something that they picked up from school, that they're going to find an interest in school, and that's going to lead them to figure out what it is that they want to do. But the truth is that really often people will figure out what it is that they want to do in life with the things that they like to do outside of school. And that's the fantastic thing about homeschooling, is letting your kids bring those outside interests into their learning, because learning and life, they are not two separate things. They are one and the same. So you know what? If your teenager loves to be outside, work that into your homeschooling. If they love to explore, if they love animals, if they love insects, work that in. My son, who just graduated last year, he did his biology, most of his biology, by doing field work, by actually being outside in creeks, studying snakes and spiders and the insects and the ecosystems there. He wasn't learning these things, in PowerPoints or in a textbook. He was actually out there learning these things in real life. And this is one of the biggest freedoms of homeschooling, is just allowing that part of life to come in and to touch your kids in a way that it just isn't going to happen in a traditional school setting. So anyway, the last thing that I wanted to just show to you was I made up some little charts that will give you an example of what a homeschool day could look like for a 9th to 12th grader. And I want you to remember when I show you these, and I said this in the other video too, that you do not follow this like it's set in stone. You know, this isn't something that you have to follow it and like check off a checklist. This is ideas. This is just to give you a glimpse of what a homeschool day might look like, but I'm hoping that it actually that it does help you a little bit. Okay, so I just wanted to say before I even start talking about this that homeschooling the teen years doesn't have to be long, tedious, complicated, or burdensome. Remember that the real world offers more lessons for kids this age than most curriculums ever will. While it certainly is important to make sure your teen is prepared for the future, doing it simply will better ensure that not only has your child learned, but that they have learned to love learning. So now let me just go over this little chart with you, and just remember, this is an example of what a typical day of a teenager or a 9th to 12th grade simple homeschool might look like. So for structured learning time, they might spend 30 to 60 minutes on silent reading. And this may include living book learning on top of other literature. It just depends on how much your teenager is reading for their homeschool. And everyone's homeschool is going to look different. But a good rule of thumb for this age is about 30 to 60 minutes of silent reading time. Notebooking can take about 20 to 30 minutes. Other book work, especially if they're doing, grammar, if they're doing math, these sorts of things might take 30 to 75 minutes a day, depending on what they're doing, if they're learning new concepts or if they're just doing review. And again, I am only giving you these time periods as an estimate. Please do not think that you absolutely have to follow this time. And that's also, if you notice, why I did make it very general, like between 30 and 75 minutes, because it really can vary, not only from family to family, but from day to day in the same family. And so now if they're doing unit study activities or other hands-on activities, that might be 30 to 60 minutes there as well. But what I want you to remember is that much of the learning of all kids, not just teenagers, but all kids, is going to be in that unstructured time, that time that your kids are not specifically doing school. So what I have here is what they might be doing in their unstructured time that they are still learning from, like part-time employment, pursuing their own interests, going to the library, watching interesting and educational movies and documentaries, and spending time in the community and or with friends. Yes, there is learning to be found in everything. So don't ever get stuck on the number of hours that your teenagers are spending doing school, because what you have got to remember, as I mentioned earlier, is that living and learning, they're one and the same. They cannot be separated. All right. So now, as always, keep in mind, again, I'm going to say this again because I know as a homeschool mom how easy it is to get stuck on this idea that you have to do things exactly as written. This is only an example of what a typical day in a relaxed homeschool might look like. All kids are different. All families are different. The point of simple homeschooling is to find something that works for your family and yet helps to maintain a peaceful and unhurried lifestyle. In that kind of atmosphere, your teen is bound to not only love learning, but to thrive. So anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you will probably have to head on over to my Instagram page because YouTube seems to never want to turn my comments back on again. So I will leave the link for Instagram in the description box. And if you like my work and would like to support me, I will leave my Patreon link in the description box as well. And I hope you have a great day.